please, and I hope that other participants will join us in this room. Sorry to be late. We had to face that the previous session, general previous session was running late. We will have a shortened session, but still 1 hour and 15 minutes, hopefully. And then for the one present in Sofia, you will be able to go for some lunch before the second session this afternoon, who will be a follow-up of this one. I am Sébastien Bacholet from ISOC France and other organization, but that's enough for presentation. And I will not do presentation of each panelist because we are running out of time, but we will start by Marit Palovrita, and then we will go to remote presenters, Daniel Dardaillet, and then Lars Christensen, and then we will come back here with Mani Mohan and Christa de Castel, and we will be hopefully able to have time to discuss with the room and with your inputs and participation. May I ask you, Maria, to start and to give the first speech of this session?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, so hello everybody. Our session today is called How to Facilitate Equal Access for All. And I think we have, we're going to be discussing various levels of access. So at the Internet Society, we are doing quite a bit of work on access. And we work from, I would say, 3 different angles. We work on the technical infrastructure, we work on human infrastructure, and we also work on the governance infrastructure. So you may know that ISOC, we promote the bottom-up processes, so we always make sure that we engage local community when we engage in technical projects. And from the technical infrastructure side, I would like to highlight perhaps a couple of examples how we promote access for all. And one such example is internet exchange points. And just a quick question, does everybody know what is an internet exchange point? Who knows? Yes, okay, no, so internet exchange point is part of the internet value access chain. So internet comes from submarine cables, and then it lands on land, and then each country has their local internet ecosystem, if you like. And finally, there is connectivity to the home in the last mile section. And internet exchange point is something in what we call middle mile, so in the local domestic internet environment. And it's a physical point where all the ISPs and operators connect to each other and exchange traffic. And what this does is that typically we at ISOC, we would promote a neutral internet exchange point which is open for all on same terms and conditions, and also a not-for-profit model. So an internet exchange point which facilitates the market's functioning, if you like, encourages competition, so creates a level playing field for all operators, both the big ones, incumbents, but also the smaller ones, lowers barriers to market access to new entrants. And also, what the internet exchange point does, quite importantly, is that it keeps the internet traffic local. So no longer does an operator have to connect to overseas to get content or services, but they get them locally. So the cost of connection goes down, and the whole consideration for the availability then becomes more interesting. So this is the supply side, if you like, the impact of the internet exchange point, but it also impacts the demand side or the adoption of the internet. So we all know that we have to work on the supply and then demand. So why do people use the internet? There needs to be local content, interesting content available for all people, not only for people who speak English, who live in maybe urban areas, but also for people in the rural areas who perhaps don't speak English. So the internet exchange point also typically attracts local content. So we often see data centers being established next to an exchange point, and then this would encourage typically local perhaps entrepreneurs or startups to create local content and to start hosting this locally, and thus making content more available for local audience. And the government may also encourage this development. So we see now in Europe at least that many governments are giving open data, releasing data for creating new apps and services. And this kind of development, of course, then also encourages the local content and makes the internet more interesting for local people, and hence facilitating access, if you like. The other example I will briefly mention is we also then focus on last mile. So I think many of us know that internet is widely available in urban areas, in densely populated areas, but then in remote rural areas, access tends to be lower. So what we also do is we have a program on wireless community projects that we've kicked off in Asia, and we are now also looking into then, especially in Eastern Europe, to see if we could perhaps pilot some of these projects on a community basis in Eastern European countries where maybe the commercial operators and the business case is not yet ready for commercial operators to move in. So this is just my little introduction of how ISOC engages on the technical side. And as I said, also we do skills work, but I will perhaps now give the floor to the next speaker and we can then discuss some of the details later on.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, we will go to Daniel Dardaillet, if it's possible. Daniel, can you hear us or hear me? And
yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay, well,
can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you very well too. Then we will show your presentation. Wait a second, the time it's coming on the screen, and then I will give you the floor. And when you want us to change the slide, you just tell us change, and it will be okay.
Okay. Okay. So good morning, everybody, and I'm sorry not to be there. Plus, I don't have internet access, so you can see me on video, but I think that's okay. So I'm going to talk about accessibility as the semantic for web for people with disabilities. So it's, and in particular what we call web accessibility. So I'm going to describe what that is and also why it's important today to care about that, and what W3C has been doing, what guideline and resource are available, and what action you can do to after the presentation if you want to get more involved. The next slide is this agenda. Let me go right into the topic. So web accessibility is not just for the content that you see on the web to be accessible by people that are blind or deaf, or cannot use their hands. It's also for the player, the browser that people use, and also for the authoring tool, the editor, which used to be a specific tool, but now they are, usually a web application like Facebook or Google where you can enter content. So all those components are described in this graphic on slide 4, where you see a pyramid of system where you have the content, which is the most important. It has to obey some guidelines that I'll talk about later. But the developer creating this content also have to use a tool that are following a standard developed by W3C to create the content and allow people with disability to create the content. And the user also, of course, they have to have assistive technology for their disability, but there is a standard as well that explains how the user agent, the browser, has to perform for a person with disability. So all that sort of creates an architecture for web accessibility that W3C has been developing for 18 years now. So the technology that are underneath that pyramid are the technology that W3C develops, HTML, etc. So they have also to be not only developed with assistive technology and disability in mind, but they have to be also implemented that way. So we have to work with the people implementing those technologies. Okay, so I'll go over the detail of the reason why it's important to care about that. Well, it has been important for as long as the web has existed. There are a lot of barriers on the web to use. The technology as people without disability, so we have to we have created this barrier in a sense. Before the web, the content was mostly text online, so it was okay to translate that into Braille or into voice outputs. But with the explosion of Web 2 application and graphics and multimedia, the level of accessibility has been going down. So we have had to care for that since the beginning of the web, in fact, since we realized what was the problem. Of course, there are many more people with disability now than before, because there are many reasons. You'll see the detail on the slide, but people are aging mostly, and people have to be online. They don't have an option. Everything happens online today. And of course, there are legal. We're at an internet governance conference, so I'll go over, of course, the detail of the legal requirements. There are legislation that have to be accessible in a sense. To talk about accessibility. And one of the most important for the industry is that whatever you do for making a website or an application more accessible is going to be beneficial for not just the accessibility expert and the disability population, but everybody using different modality and things like that. So the next slide, if you go to slide 6, it goes over the detail of the importance. Let me just go through slide 7 quickly. I think we don't have a lot of time, but just to mention that web accessibility is not just for visual impairment, but it's for all kinds of problems. Marketplace, slide 8, you can go over that in detail. The slides are available. So that's an important one. Slide 9, the contribution to universal design and to benefit for the non-disabled population. That's a fundamental criteria. If you look at the disability situation for non-online access, let's say the curb cuts in the road, on the sidewalk to cross the road, the statistics show that even though the legislation forced them to be present for people with disability, 90 or 80% of the views are for people without disability, just people carrying a luggage, or a mother with infant in carriage and things like that. So this is an important example, and we have the same situation online. If you make a page accessible, then it's going to have a lot of benefits carrying by these actions, And you can see all the detail. I'm not going to go over them, but one important thing, for instance, is that if you make your website with better semantics for people with disability, then the search engine as well will understand these semantics, because there's the standard, and we'll be able to better index your content. But there are many more. So the requirement section is important for governance. When we received 97, there were very few policy related to accessibility, but the European Commission was starting to be sensitive to that. They had requests of, sort of a guideline and directive for making websites accessible for the citizens that were sort of requiring that. So, but at that time there was no standard at all except for our guidelines. So the problem was then a political problem, because W3C is not an official standard organization and not if you want, a government mandate standard organization. So our standard, in a sense, even though everybody was using them, were not valid for using procurement and for using legislation in general. So it took us about 10 years or more to change the legislation in Europe. It happened in 2012 with the Parliament decisions to allow some of our standards to be used by legally, if you want, by government. But before that, it was a problem. So we got a good amount of funding at W3C to promote accessibility, to make it happen in a sense. So the Commission was really active with us during those past 20 years, I would say. So there are a lot of different requirements, and the list is growing. So there is a link on slide 10 to this sort of policy situation, but there are many more sites now tracking that. But at the beginning, it was only us. So just a couple of words on W3C. So it's a standard organization, even though it's not a de jure standard organization. Some of our standards are now promoted as ISO standards. So web accessibility was the first one for this path, transposition to happen. So it's now ISO 40500 for 4500. So it's sort of a sign that it's really a recognized standard that can be used by not just the people that trust the internet forum and consortia, but all the regular, government, policy-oriented people in 200 countries that for which the ISO brand of standard is better in a sense. So W3C develops a lot of web standards, and some of them have been now made ISO standard, but most of them are used by the industry and therefore by everybody. So we administratively we operate from different host sites. So there is not a legal W3C form. It's a project between various neutral organizations. On slide 11, you have the list: MIT, RCM in Europe, etc. And our activities are sort of spread across all these geography, and web accessibility is one of the pillars of the W3C1. The 5 sort of domain of the W3C. So the Web Accessibility Initiative is the domain for accessibility. As I mentioned, it was sponsored by various governments, which I suppose so right the need for a better standard in that area, which is now very useful because it can be used by the entire industry. You have to understand for the industry, which is a funding W3C, it was very important to have this technology delivered and a standard recognized, because it's a nightmare for them to adapt to each different country, which used to have different legislation for accessibility. So when you have a big procurement with thousands of software to deliver, and your IBM or Oracle, you don't want to develop your project for each country and have different quality assessment for accessibility, etc. So it's very important to have one standard. It sort of favor, an open market of products. So I don't know how long I have. I can go over some of the details of how the web accessibility is organized. There are basically several working groups.
Daniel, it's Sébastien. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think we got your message, and I think we will put your presentation on the website, and if there are people who need more information on that, we will ask them to direct to W3C, to you and to your colleague. May I ask you to conclude your presentation, Daniel, please?
Okay, so let's go to the last slide. And you can see some pointers, some references to some resource that you can visit. Most of the information is public, participation is public. So, if you are interested in the future of web accessibility, I encourage you to look at those resources. And with that, thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much. And hope that next time you will be with us and not just on the phone. And I don't know, you will stay on the phone or you will disconnect, and just to know if when we finish the presentation we can come back to you for question, or you prefer not to be online.
No, I can stay on WebEx on the phone for a while.
Okay, thank you very much, then Daniel, and maybe later with question. Okay, now let's go to the other remote presenter. It's Lars Christensen. We need to go to WebEx, and then you will be able to share your presentation. I give you the floor, Lars. Thank you very much for joining us online.
Yes, thank you. You should be able to see my screen now. I'm not going to go through a major presentation. I'm just going to show you a few examples of what it is that we do. So greetings from Denmark, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there today. I represent the RoboBraille Consortium, which is an organization of other organizations who are promoting universal access to alternate media in order to support inclusion and self-sufficiency of those with special needs in education, in the workplace, and also social inclusion. So if we look at our users, and the previous speakers touched upon it, if we look at users who are blind, then they will need material in Braille, they'll need material in audio formats, and they'll need tactile illustrations and so on. If we look at people who are partially sighted, then they will need enlarged print, they will need audio material. People who are dyslexic will need material in audio format. Poor language, people with poor language skills will also need material in alternate formats. And that is really what we're trying to do with the RoboBraille service. So let me show you what the RoboBraille service is. I'm now at the RoboBraille website, and since you and Sofia, I put it up in the Bulgarian version, but I think I'm going to switch to English because otherwise I'm not going to understand what this is all about. So what we are doing is that we're going from country to country in Europe and beyond, and we're implementing the RoboBraille service, which is an automated document conversion service that can convert a whole range of different documents from one format and into a number of alternate formats. And at the moment, we can say that we have support for all the main European languages. We have support for some of the smaller European languages. We also have support for Russian, for Arabic, for American English, for Latin American Spanish. We even have support for Greenlandic in the service. So we're trying to solve some rather practical problems with the service. So let me just show you what it is to convert a document. It's a free service that users in employment, users in education can use to convert whatever material that they need to convert. So what I'm doing now is that I'm uploading a document to the service. This first document I uploaded is called document with mathcontents.docx. And since this is a docx file, we assume that it's a Word document, and because of that, we offer the following 6 conversion options to the user. We can convert it into an MP3 audio file, into a DAISY full text, full audio document, into a DAISY document. And by the way, a DAISY document is a structured audiobook. You may know, if you're familiar with the MP3 format, you know that this is a linear format, and it can be very difficult to orientate and navigate within that format. The DAISY format, in contrast, is a structured audiobook format where you have all the navigational aids that you need in order to orientate yourself and navigate in the document. So you have a table of contents, you have a concept of pages, you have headings, and so on. So, and you can use the service to convert documents into structured audiobooks, even documents that contains math equations and other scientific notation. You can also convert the document into a digital Braille book that can then be embossed on a Braille embosser or showed on a Braille display. You can convert documents into ebooks so that they can be rendered on an ebook reader, a commercial ebook reader, and they can be changed to the personal preferences of users who are going to be reading it. That could be people with low vision, or it could be people who are dyslexic. And then finally, we have what we call a set of accessibility conversion options where we can convert inaccessible documents. That could be scanned documents, it could be JPEG pictures of text, it could be PowerPoint presentations and so on. Documents that are tricky to use if you are blind, if you are partially sighted, or if you are dyslexic. So let me just show you what we can do in terms of MP3 audio I'm using the American or the British English version of the site, so it actually assumes that the document is in English, but it may be that I know differently. It may be that the document is actually in French, or the document may be in Russian or another language, and I can simply just switch to that particular speed synthesizer. I can also set the speed of the audio for this. And then the last thing I need to do is simply just to key in my email address and submit the document. And now everything is done automatically. So this is the RoboBraille service. Let me show you just one more conversion option that we have in the service. I'm uploading this time the Princess and the this fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen in a PDF version. And what I'll do now is I'll do an accessibility conversion of it. And in step 3, where I before had all these different languages, I now get a list of various document types that I can convert the document into. I just decide to have the document converted into a Word file, like this. Right. So this was really all I wanted to show you. We have the RoboBraille service. It has been, like I said, implemented throughout Europe. It is available in many European languages. It has a lot of different interfaces to it. We also have a companion digital library for alternate media that we are setting up in various countries. It's either used, as in our own country, as a national resource for teachers, for parents, and for others to log into to retrieve educational material, or as the example from Romania, it's used as a shared repository of schools for people with low vision and people who are blind to share education material. So, and I think I'll just leave it at that. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'll just hang on and answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Lars. We get two brilliant presentation from other country here, and now we will come back to this room with people live. You can see them, and that's also good. May I ask Manny to take the floor and to give his presentation or some thought about the issue? Thank you, Manny.
Thanks, Sebastian. So I think when we look at internet access, so we know from all the macro level numbers, there are probably more than 4 billion consumers who are not connected to the internet as of today, and the number will decrease over time. There are, I think, 3 dimensions that people primarily talk about when it comes to barriers to internet adoption. One of them is affordability, and Mary talked about how internet exchange points and increasing submarine capacity, particularly around Africa, has helped to reduce affordability or improve affordability and reduce connectivity costs. The other dimension is accessibility, and one of them is accessibility for people who don't have the ability as others to access content. And again, we've seen innovation in those areas from Lars and Daniel about how that area is being improved. And the third area is availability of infrastructure, particularly last mile infrastructure. In many parts of the world, particularly in the developing world, mobile is the first point of access for consumers. Fixed broadband infrastructure is very poor, maybe less than 10% of the population is covered by that. So for example, out of the 4.5 billion people without internet access, more than half of them live in Asia. But the important point to note is that about 1.5 billion people have access to a 3G mobile signal, but still don't connect to the internet. And so there are availability of infrastructure, availability of mobile signal is not the primary issue that is affecting internet adoption. Of course, affordability is an issue in many markets where the willingness to pay is a concern. But if you dig further down, and if you look at some of the countries in Asia, for example, you can compare India versus Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka, for example, has one of the cheapest access prices for internet, less than $5 per month for about 500 megabytes per access. It has more than 80% coverage of 3G signals. it has a very high literacy rate, over 90%. But still, internet penetration is less than 20%. Many of you might have read a recent McKinsey report looking at barriers to internet adoption. If you haven't, I encourage you to to look at the report. And I think one of the fourth factors it identified was the incentive to use internet. So despite having average incomes that are sufficient to meet the cost of internet access, despite having availability of internet access, despite having a higher literacy rate to use the internet, still people are not using internet in many parts of the world. And it is not really just an emerging market issue. So even, for example, in the United Kingdom, more than 6 million adults don't use the internet. In the United States, more than 50 million adults don't use the internet. And disability is one factor. The other two factors are, one, age. So primarily the people who are older, who are maybe 70 plus years of age, don't tend to use the internet. And also underprivileged consumers, so people from lower socioeconomic groups also don't tend to use the internet. So I think the availability, accessibility, and the affordability issues would be solved with time, as, for example, smartphone prices come down, prices of data plans come down, internet exchange points and broadband connectivity between continents continue to grow. But I think still the question of incentive has to be addressed if we are going to get internet access by not 20% of the people, but 80% of the people in many parts of the world. And I think that's where many of us could help, because the reason most cited by those who don't access the internet is they don't see a need to access it. And so there's a lack of awareness, and maybe there's a lack of trust given the concerns around monitoring of behavior by third-party companies and governments. So I think that aspect needs to be addressed if we are to solve this problem. So I just wanted to bring two other dimensions, which is availability and relevance or incentive into the debate about accessibility and affordability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manny. And now I will ask Christina to say a few words. And usually when I go to a library, I go to take a paper book. Why you are coming to talk to us about internet governance? It's not on a paper book.
Absolutely. So a lot of people do think about libraries in traditional ways as places to borrow paper books. And what we see more and more, and what we think of as librarians, is that libraries are about access to information. And the book has been the vehicle for many years. But the vehicle for access to information is now computers and technology. And many countries in Europe have started to recognize that internet access is a human right. And as the other panelists have noted, it's a right that isn't available to everyone. So 23% of Europe doesn't have internet access in their homes right now. And this is the place where libraries can really make a difference, that by providing computers with internet access in libraries, we give the opportunity for people who can't afford it in their homes or who don't have the skills to use the internet or to use computers, a place where they can come and gain those skills. The thing that's important about libraries is that they're trusted institutions, and they're trusted by people who may not have the same advantages, who may have lower income, also by women and by families and by children, which means that they're a place to reach communities that may not be able to access technology in the way that more privileged groups are. We know that 13.9 million people use libraries for computers and internet access in Europe annually, and for 1.9 of them, it's the only place that they can go for free public access to the internet. So a really critical part of being part of our cultural, our social lives for access to e-government services. It's also important for the 30% of people that are living in rural areas. And so what the library can be is at that first place to reach out with the infrastructure to bring the internet into rural areas where mobile perhaps isn't affordable yet, but we can lay the infrastructure to start with a library. So it's important that we really begin to see that a library is about access to information and the skills that people can gain rather than about the borrowing of printed books, which is certainly the history of libraries. As far as the skills that libraries convey, media and information literacy is a core part of what libraries have always taught. And we've taught it in the context of what the rules are around copyright, but also it's really about how people can learn to make their own informed decisions. So how can they evaluate information, and how can they determine which information is trustworthy and which is not? So this is something that libraries and library staff feel is an important thing to teach. It's also an area that has been of increasing interest, is teaching people how to protect themselves online. So freedom of expression and privacy of personal information are important values to libraries, and as a result, this is an area that libraries make an effort to teach people about. And certainly a theme that we've been hearing over and over yesterday and today at these sessions is how important it is for people to become aware of the privacy and the security of their information. And so it's a place that libraries can assist by being somewhere that is trusted, and people can come to learn about how to use the internet and technology. Not everyone has a friend or a family member that can teach them how to use their smartphone for the first time. And so this is a place where libraries are starting to fill those gaps around the world. And so an important part of our way of bridging that last 23% for Europe who don't have computers with internet in their homes.
Thank you very much, Christina. The next time I go to my library, I will ask them if they can help me with connection, internet connection.
Sure.
So that's a good news for me. And thank you. Now we have half an hour, and I would like very much if you have questions or comments from the participants. Then if you wish to take the floor, we will give you a microphone, and you will be able to make comments, intervene, to talk. Yes. Thank you.
So what do libraries need?
Thank you for that question. So some of the things that are useful for libraries in order to fulfill this role would be for governments to commission research on the state of media and information literacy in their countries and regions, so that training that's appropriate to the needs of the specific communities can be designed and delivered in those facilities. Another is to ensure that policy and legislation supports sustainable libraries, so that funding is ensured for libraries, not just to create the buildings, but to keep the technology up to date. So that's an important thing. And then another option is to facilitate partnerships that ensure reduced or free internet access in libraries. So a place where particularly government or telecommunications companies can work with libraries in partnership to ensure that there is internet access for every member of the community. So those would be three ways that libraries can be helped by other organizations.
Thank you. You want follow-up question? Okay, and if there are others who want to take the floor, please tell me.
Maybe just additional question to the question I already asked. What are the main obstacles for libraries to achieve what they need to achieve, having in mind the current policy state?
So in this area, the current obstacles would be partly the recognition that this is a function of libraries. So we need to work ourselves on greater awareness around the world of libraries as a place for help with technology and for access to technology. So this is something that both governments and libraries need to do a better job of. That the obstacle of funding is certainly the primary one, making sure that there is the technology in place in the libraries and that it is maintained, and then also that we have skills in libraries of library staff. And so sometimes that can be assisted by bringing by bringing groups together, supporting the meetings that help people who work in libraries to learn new skills. So those are some of the core obstacles right now.
Thank you. Do we have something online? Nothing. Okay, then I will ask a question, if there are no other questions, to you, Marit. You talked to us about the exchange point. That's, I will say, a technical need. Can you tell us about another point that EuroDIG is working on for better access? Because the motto of EuroDIG is Internet for all, then I guess everything must be in this direction. But if you can take another example, it would be great. Yeah, please.
So I very much liked actually Mani's analysis of the situation, and you highlighted two things that kind of are the points that are crucial for improving access. And one was awareness, another one was trust. And I think this is very much in line also with the Internet Society's interpretation of things. So technical infrastructure evolves and is being built as we speak, but more and more we see that it's about awareness and trust. And awareness, of course, then relates directly back to, well, e-skills, capacity building activities. And at EuroDIG, of course, we are an organization that promotes bottom-up governance, as I already said. So what we try to do with our projects, whether it's IXP, whether it's last mile connectivity, we always try to include the local community in the projects from the beginning. So for example, in the rural Wi-Fi projects that we've done, it's actually called, you can find there's a very good website with many best practices from Asia. I think it's Wireless for Communities, wireless4communities.org. You can Google it, and you will see that there's a very extensive training program. So in fact what has happened is that we brought on some initial trainers to a community, rural community, and they have then trained the local people for various functions to run the local internet. So there will be people who, for example, had maybe some technical capability and they became systems administrators in the local school that was connected, or perhaps the government building or the hospital. Then you have really regular citizens who found new professions through the internet. And they wanted to, for example, become entrepreneurs and establish a business. So we did e-skills training, software training, all kinds of things, so that you start seeing local champions in the community who can then make sure that the internet is sustainable and also in the long run will be successful in the community. On the technical level, I mean, EuroDIG, of course, is a technical community organization in part. So we also have a heavy focus on the capacity building in the internet space. And I think on the trust especially, there's a lot of work going on, probably in the rooms next door where they're talking about cybersecurity, etc., on the various trainings and current developments that are being ongoing at the moment. But I'm not going to go into that. But this is also very much a consideration when we talk about access in countries, etc. So those were maybe my thoughts on the local community and how to involve and make sure that we have the skills in the community.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone want to take the floor? If not, I will. Wait. I will give you the microphone because the people online will not hear you if you don't have the microphone.
So it's all about having access to broadband, is it? Infrastructure.
Well, as we said, it's not all about broadband is providing a basis. As we tried to say, I think I tried to explain it, Mani tried to explain it, that we often consider that there is the access side. So there needs to be infrastructure and broadband to have, of course, access. Or it could be mobility. Now there are various technology means to have access. So that is a basis. But the other side is then the skills, the demand for the internet. So how do we engage an individual in the countryside who perhaps is of a certain age to use the internet and to use it for e-government services, to be active in the community, to participate in the community. So I think these are the two sides of the coin.
So what is the problem? The difficulty of having infrastructure, of making one happening, or is it afterwards?
Well, I think we have different, of course, regions. We're here in Bulgaria, and I think Bulgaria, for example, it has a competitive telecoms market. It's fairly well connected, and what we see is that, well, GSMA represents, of course, operators. So where there's a business case for operators, private companies to go and build infrastructure, they will go and build it because they will have enough people to using it and they will get their money back. But then we have regions like the remote areas where there's no business case to build infrastructure simply because the upfront investment will be too large and you will not be able to guarantee that you get your money back. And I think that's where the demand creation really becomes crucial. So raising awareness with the communities in the remote areas so that they can use the internet and they want to use the internet and they find the internet interesting. And this is where I think, you know, the ISOC's work as well comes to play. So raising awareness, trying to engage the local people to use the internet, whether it's becoming entrepreneurs, creating software with local startups, or perhaps, you know, agricultural community, they sell products and just start selling online, or things like that. I don't know if you want to add on to that, Manu.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, there are two sides of the problem. One is the availability of infrastructure. So in most parts, urban and suburban operators will build it because there is a business case to make profits. And so at the moment, if you look around the world, on average, maybe more than 2/3 of the population is covered by a mobile broadband signal, meaning a 3G signal, and it will probably go up to about 90% over the next 4 or 5 years. But still, there will be 10% where there won't be a signal, so there's an issue to be tackled there. And then, of course, we have the question about even those who are covered. So, you know, if you want to use terminology such as the urban poor, whether they will be able to access the internet. So even if they have a signal, they are not accessing it. So that problem also needs to be tackled. So in terms of the last 10% that may not be covered, I mean, there are multiple solutions. So one of them is to build you know, internet cafes or libraries or some kind of pooled infrastructure where consumers can come and use the internet. But of course, the sustainability of those models are, I mean, libraries, of course, have other functions. So they're able to provide a service and sustain themselves. But if you just provide internet access, so for example, internet cafes in many emerging markets, the business is going down because it's very difficult to sustain on a continuous basis. So there is a problem to be tackled. I don't think anyone has found a solution. I mean, even in many European countries, there is areas where there is no coverage. And it's very difficult to create a business case to build coverage. So there needs to be some kind of government support to do it. And then the question is, where do you get the money to do it? Whether it is to support broadband connectivity to libraries or to provide broadband to a isolated population with low population density. And the question then is, you know, whether it comes from taxation or whether it comes from some other forms. And that is, I think, a much more wider debate.
And I think also in Bulgaria, I remember I was working here many years ago and you had a very famous telecenter project. So Bulgaria was one of the first countries in Central and Eastern Europe that implemented telecenters across rural areas. But I tend to agree with you that unless there's any other function to a telecenter, then these projects tend to have a life cycle. And today, when you have mobile devices, much more mobile accessibility, these also become perhaps not redundant totally, but there needs to be a change in the thinking and what is the next step. And I think this is also a problem for governments now because, you know, maybe 5 years ago it was enough to put some EU funds and to establish some telecenters and hope that people go there and have access. But if this is not today attracting enough people, then how can the governments really incentivize, first of all, the infrastructure, but also then the demand creation? And I think, you know, regulation is a kind of course, cross-cutting thing, but we don't want governments to regulate too much. You know, that's skewing the markets and perhaps too much impacting the natural way. We've seen in Greece, for example, with the structural funds, what they did, okay, they used structural funds to build the infrastructure, but they also gave vouchers to citizens in rural areas, I mean actual money vouchers to use the internet, because the citizen in a rural area was not otherwise, you know, didn't see the relevance, so they actually, with EU funding, gave vouchers for them to pay their monthly internet bills to try and attract internet users. But then I think here, you know, the question is again, well, is this the right way to do it? I mean, should we not try and find some more innovative ways to engage people in the internet, and should it not be based on the content and the services available, and you know, maybe content in local language as well? We cannot assume that everybody can read English and read, you know, newspapers in English. So I think that's also then the next question. So how can we engage government in a kind of more holistic internet ecosystem promotion beyond regulating or just putting money on projects that seem a bit too simplistic?
Thank you. And go ahead, Christina, and then I would like to ask questions to our remote presenters, if you allow me.
Absolutely. I wanted to comment on the population of the urban poor, or the people who have the opportunity to access the internet but don't choose to access the internet. And I think it's an interesting question for us. Why does this matter? So why does it matter if someone chooses not to access information through technology? And the reason that this matters now is because as time goes on, we're seeing categories of publication that are no longer available in print. So this will no doubt continue along this path. Areas where information changes very rapidly are areas where material is more likely to be published only in a digital format. In scientific research, in health, and in technology, we know that these areas tend to move so quickly that it's no longer economically sensible to make those publications in print format. And so there are categories of information people don't have access to. We also see an increase in government services that are available to people primarily through electronic means. And this means that people who are not choosing to access the internet have real barriers to getting access to government social services. So sometimes this is at the same time that the government offices are putting in computers for self-service access and perhaps reducing the number of people that are available to help. And so we create additional barriers for people who don't have technology skills. This is the reason why it's great to put computers in libraries rather than telecenters that don't have those other services, so that we do have something sustainable with staff who are trained in access to information specifically. And the research in looking at computers in telecenters versus libraries has found that when computers with internet are in libraries, people access more government services, more health information, more of the specific kinds of things that they need to improve their lives.
Thank you, Christina. Daniel, you are still online?
Yes.
Yes. I would like to ask you the following question. What we, as participants in EuroDIG, but as internet user or businesses, what we can do to be sure that the standards you are promoting in W3C are really used on the web developed by company, by the government, by non-for-profit association. What can we do to help you?
Well, thanks for the question. But it depends on the role you have in your life, in your organization. If you're a user, it's hard to find out without the proper knowledge that a website is inaccessible, because by principle, it shouldn't make a difference for the non-disabled user when he accesses a website that is accessible. You should not turn a website into a boring website because you want to make it accessible. So for the user, it's hard to see. You have to use specific tools that would sort of simulate the experience of a blind user or someone without a mouse, so without pointer on the screen. But now if you are someone writing web page, if you are not content, then of course you have to look at the standards that W3C has developed, and there are many tools, courses available, and as I said, it's a requirement if you want to be part of the larger industry and the government calls and things like that. So if you work for a policymaker, I think there is a general trend toward more accessibility in general and in legislation when it's needed. So the only thing that I would ask the policymaker is to support open standards such as the Web Accessibility Initiative, but it comes with a system made of other open standards, of course, HTML and stylesheet and semantic web and linked data. All that is good for accessibility. So it's just, policymakers should pay more attention to the sort of the promotion and the evolution of open standards, because it's good for openness and for user and the market.
Thank you, Daniel. Lars, hopefully you are still online with us. I was very impressed with your presentation, and why you don't change the name of your tool? It seems that it's a very good tool for everybody, for any users. Sometimes I need to change. I received a PDF. I want to make some changes, and I am not able to do it. And now that I know your tool, I may use it. What is the limit of the usage of your software, of your tool? No, it's not anymore online. Oh, that's a pity. Okay, then no answer. Any comments or questions from the room, or did I need to follow on with some other questions? Yes. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for the presentations. I wanted to ask about more details. How exactly do you involve the local community? And as well, do you use the help of volunteers? Because sometimes government organizations are not enough.
So regarding volunteers, the Internet Society is of course a non-profit organization, part of the technical civil community, civil society if you like. And we have in many countries local associations that we call chapters. There's one in Bulgaria, for example. And this is our natural, I suppose, go-to base when we do engagements. So we would like always to include our chapters. There are also many other members. People can be individual members, etc. But for us, I think this is the natural go-to place. And when we do engagements, whether it's trainings, we also do a lot of, for example, events just to get stakeholders together. We are very conscious of the fact that we would like everybody to be in the room so that it's truly multi-stakeholder. And this means that, okay, we need the government, as we've discussed, because government can be a very important facilitator for access. We need the business, because at the end of the day, if we want sustainability and investment, we need the businesses to make it happen. But we then also need the civil society and the sector. And we are very conscious that we always include the civil society. And this could be anybody who simply has an interest from the maybe end user point of view, maybe has a concern on a specific aspect like, I don't know, freedom of information or human rights even, because internet of course touches all these things. So we try and do this in a proactive way when we engage the local community. But it depends of course on countries, how active people are, etc. But we try and do this. Thank you. Did I answer your question or?
Can you, to finish, maybe add a few words? You are talking about project, but sometime something happened in the country, and our chapter get mobilized and try to mobilize all the other chapter and ISOC Global, and it's also a very powerful tool to help a population and
Yes.
maybe.
So many times, for example, I mean, related to internet access, there are, for example, government introduces a bill. So I'm taking an example from Hungary, I think it was last year, tax on the internet. And it was being introduced, the bill. And immediately this caused waves in the news. We saw it, it came up in news in Europe, across the world. And immediately, you know, we start in the region receiving questions. And the first point, go-to point for us is the chapter. So to contact with, in this case, Hungary ISOC to ask what's going on, can we understand what's the background, is there something we can do, can we put out a press release, who do we know who is in our community that perhaps could, you know, try and influence the government or to make the case for in this case, a neutral open internet that doesn't necessarily be taxed. So we do this on a regular basis. But of course, you know, civil society is a very large area. So we try and engage the civil society, well, as I said, through the chapters, but also then like here in the EuroDIG. So it's very nice to see new people and to be able to then talk to you here on a more kind of wider basis.
Yeah, and I wanted also to refer to the last earthquake where immediately the chapter in the country take a lead to provide tools to access to the internet and to help the rescue of a lot of people in the Himalaya area a few weeks ago, unfortunately, but it was the case in other places in the world. Then it's important to have a chapter in every country because we need sometime, not for good reason, but always, no, not for good reason because it's happened something bad, but we need for good reason participation of local people, and it's important for, not just for governance issue, but
yes.
more globally.
And just maybe as a follow-up, I mean, in preparation for this session, I mean, chapter was the go-to person. We wanted a representative from Bulgaria, and in the follow-up session after lunch, we will have the CEO of your communications agency who will come and talk about the Bulgarian case in terms of creating and promoting access. So this may be also an opportunity for you to get involved and ask directly from the government people, you know, how are they taking civil society into consideration in the specific case of Bulgaria? Because I imagine this is of, well, special interest to you, so.
Okay, it seems that we have to conclude. I saw the organizer coming to us saying it's finished, and it's a good transition to say that now you have time to go for lunch, but come back to this room. We will have a follow-up session on the specific example of what we, or people, or organization do on that subject, and that will be a very interesting follow-up. I would like to thank the presenters, and I may ask you to clap those presenters online and here. And thank you for coming for this session, and have a good lunch, and please come back this afternoon.